First, let's do a recap of what happened in the previous video, since it can get a wee bit complicated. The point of the LFO-Stepper was to replicate what happens with the stepper in the modulation section, where each note played will advance to a new step in the stepper and use its value to change the sound. You can't have that in the effects section because it's actually monophonic there, as opposed to polyphonic in the modulation section. But it would be nice to be able to recreate that using effects, since you can just use it for notes that are played one at a time, such as in drums. And I managed to be able to do that by combining together velocity or a key tracker, the LFO using one shot, and the formula device. However, there was a major problem, which was that if notes were played fast enough and it was combined with either a low tempo for the song or simply using retrigger to retrigger the notes really fast, then the notes wouldn't actually step to the next step. And the problem was the LFO, which has a max speed of 1 LPC. So its custom envelope, which goes from 1 to 0, in order to trigger the formula device. When the notes are played really fast, it's never able to go from 1 to 0, and so the next step is never taken. Now, you might be thinking, well, just replace the LFO with something else. But unfortunately, it is the only effect that exists that can operate in this way. But there is an option to use something different in conjunction with the velocity tracker. And we can use that for its intended effect, which is to transmit different values depending on the volume value that it actually receives. And so we can do that by using phrases. Set up a dummy sample, which is blank, and then transmit full volume followed by no volume, 80 to 0. But that'll just operate at the same speed, so we're going to have the same problem, right? Well, I often forget this as well. Each phrase can have its own individual LPB, lines per beat value. So if you set this really high, then it will actually operate much faster than the LFO can. In fact, at 256, it's virtually instantaneous. So the way I have it set up is the phrase emulates the LFO by having only 2 lines, no repeat mode is on, and the high LPB. This does have a downside in that it's difficult to set up more complicated phrases rather than just the single note here because of the high LPB. But phrases can have a length of up to 512 lines, and you can somewhat lower the LPB in order to construct something more complicated. But I'll leave you to figure out the details for your own particular situation. And just as a side note here, I've discovered a way to actually replace the formula with an LFO, where you can put in multiple steps just like you would with the stepper device. It's obviously a lot easier to set up. And the reason this can work is because the minimum value of the LFO in the frequency is infinite LPC, which stops it entirely. So what you're doing is stopping and starting the playback. So it can move between steps at your command. In the phrases, you will actually have to reduce the LPB. I found 48 works best. And you'll have to put the velocity tracker to 1.333 LPC in order to get each step to go cleanly to the next step when the envelope length is 16 points. Now, because we're using LFO again, we're going to run the same problem as before, which is that it's not going to run fast enough when you have a low BPM and LPB. It simply won't move on to the next step. But if you plan on never going that low with a tempo, or never using retriggers of notes that fast, then this can be a neat little option to set things up quicker than using the formula device.